This is FYI on your TV, brought to you by Hometown News. I'm Kathy Botham, and I've got my history teacher, Mr. Phillips, back with me. Doug Phillips, thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome.
We're going
Pleasure to be here.
Go down memory lane here in Smith
That's
Falls,
right.
too, with one of your books that you wrote,
Yep.
Baseball Summer, and it's the story of the 1937 Smith Falls Beavers.
Yes.
We did have a professional baseball team here
Yes.
for one season,
Right.
and we're going to talk about that here, right in Smith Falls.
Yes, we did. It was only here for 1 year. The team had wonderful facilities in town. They had it was excellent ball, but the team didn't draw very much. They only drew 14,000 fans for the whole year. So the next year they moved to Auburn, New York. But the league itself was called the Canadian American League. It ran from 1936 to 1951. In 1936 there were 6 teams in the league. In 1938 there were 37 rather. There were 8 teams in the league, 4 in Canada and 4 in the United States. The ones in Canada were in Perth, Brockville, Ottawa, and Smith Falls. And in the United States, they were Utica, Rome, Ogdensburg, and Gloversville. And the players would go back and forth. And I think I sent you a picture of one of the ball players that I was able to meet up with. I've only met one of the ball players in person because I did my research almost 60 years after the team played here. So there weren't too many of them around. I was very impressed how many of them were around. They were, when they played here, they were young, athletic men. Most of them in their early 20s. So, you know, they lived a lot of them lived a long life. And the man that I talked to was a man named Art Horsington. He was a left-handed pitcher, and he lived in Marcellus, New York. And when I first talked to him on the phone, he asked me what I thought was a very strange question. He said, "Tell me, Doug, when you go to Canada, do you still take the ferry?" I said, "No, Art, you don't take the ferry anymore." And so the next time I crossed over at Ivy Lee, just on the American side, there's a great big rock with a plaque, you know, set in the rock. And I stopped. And I got out of the car, went over, and I read what the plaque said. The Ivy Lee Bridge was opened by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and William Lyon Mackenzie King, I think it was in June 1938. So in 1937, when the players went back and forth to the States, they had to take a ferry across the St. Lawrence River. They took the ferry either from Brockville or from Prescott. From Prescott, they would go over to Ogdensburg. From Brockville, they would go over to a place called Morristown. The bridge at Johnstown, it didn't open until 1960. So there was no bridges across the St. Lawrence River in 1937. Some of the players were a lot of the players, when the original group that came up, most of them came from around the Syracuse, New York. The manager was a man named Johnny Haddock, and he was from Syracuse, so he invited some of the amateur players to come up and sign contracts and try out for this team. And several of them did, but some major league teams began to send some of their prospects into Smith Falls. The New York Yankees sent several. In fact, one of the players said that the Smith Falls team was a Yankee farm. He didn't say farm team, he said Yankee farm, which I thought was a neat thing to say, neat way of putting it. Now, why would they say, and also I know the Pittsburgh Pirates, they sent a player here too. Now, why would they send the players to Smith Falls? Well, some of the leagues, there was several different levels, and some of the leagues were were one-man shows, and the financial status that was kind of shaky, and some leagues collapsed in the middle of the year, and so but the Canadian American League was well run. It was founded by, or it was promoted originally by a name familiar to people in Smith Falls, Naughty Lee. He promoted the league in 1936, and and one of his rewards for doing that, he was granted the Ogdensburg franchise. So he moved to Smith Falls, I think, in 1941, but in 1937, 36 and 37 anyways, he was running the team in Ogdensburg. So some of these franchises weren't very steady, but the Smiths Falls franchise was stable. It was owned not by an individual, but it was owned by the Canadian Pacific Recreation Association, which was an association of people who worked at the CPR. They, in 1919, this association or club, they bought 19 acres of part of the McGilvery farm across from the hospital, where the arenas are now and the tennis courts and all that. That was originally not owned by the town. It was originally owned by this Canadian Pacific Recreation Association. By 1937, they had a covered grandstand that could seat 2,500 people. It was wonderful. The ball field was surrounded by a wooden fence. I think in some of the pictures I sent you, you can see the wooden fence. But the highlight of the property was the playing field. They used to have the Canadian Pacific Recreation Association would have an annual meeting, and the annual meeting was reported on the front page of the Record News. And at the annual meeting, there'd be various committees who would report about the progress or some challenges they had through the year. And there was a committee report about the ball diamond. And I remember reading about some of these, couple of these years, they had a real problem with a low spot in the outfield, just behind second base. And I don't know, isn't that kind of cute? They're working on the second base. But I was reading, that was down in Cooperstown, New York, on 2 occasions. I spent the day down there. I got up at 3:30 in the morning and drove to Cooperstown, and so I was in the library by 9 o'clock. And they had, there were some books that sort of surveyed minor leagues by year. They were one of them was put out by Spalding. It was a sporting goods company, and there was another one put out by a company called Reach. And they would have say, take the league, and they would, mention who played in the teams are in the league, and then they would do a thumbnail sketch of the facilities or the play fields. And I remember reading, the comment was that Smiths Falls had one of the finest minor league ballparks in North America. Wow.
Wow. Yes.
So all of this work that the recreation club did paid off. It was not being run by some profit motive. It was being run to provide a good facility. And a lot of the ball field is. Another thing I should mention. Several years ago, a gentleman moved with his family here from England. He could not believe the quality of the soccer pitch out in that same area. And just a few months ago, I was talking to somebody from Ottawa, and I found out I was from Smiths Falls. I said, oh, 30 years ago, I used to play soccer on this traveling, and Smiths Falls had a wonderful soccer pitch. Oh, really? Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew, Now, what happened to the soccer pitch and the ball diamond? Well, that's where the new arena is. And Judy Collins wrote a song about that. She said, "You never know what you got till it's gone."
That's right. That's
now,
right.
I think she was writing about Smiths Falls, but maybe she's writing about something else.
Now, you mentioned it in the book a couple of times, and you mentioned it already too. Attendance wasn't good.
No.
35 cents. Was that a lot back then? That's what the admission was to get. It was 35 cents. Was that a lot back then?
Well, I can read a couple. I can read something here about to give you an idea of some prices. I'm gonna find it here. Just a second. I don't know where it is. This is a boy. He was 14 years old. His mother ran the boarding house that accommodated up to 9 ball players. As a family member, I helped with the work around the house. I recall so clearly one of my jobs was to slice bread. We didn't have sliced bread at the time. I would slice up to 4 or 5 loaves of bread and put out 2 or 3 pounds of butter cut in 2. That was just the bread and butter detail. There were lots of other jobs to be done. When I had to peel potatoes, I did it a peck at a time. It was a busy proposition. My mother used to give me a $2 bill. I would go to Darlington's Bakery and get Darlington's Dairy, and get 10 pounds of the finest creamery butter you could find for 20 cents a pound. Sugar and flour were 1 cent a pound, $1 for a 100-pound bag. We bought tea in bulk, a 50-pound chest. So what sugar costs now? It's more than a cent a pound, isn't it? So 35 cents would not be insignificant.
It was, yeah, okay.
Now, having said that, at a family funeral, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I approached a friend of my mother, who had been a teenager at that time. And my mother's been long dead, but I approached a friend of my mother's, and I said, "Do you remember when that professional baseball team was here?" She turned to me, and her eyes lit up, and she said, "Oh, Doug, we went to all the games." But I guess there weren't enough teenage girls to fill the stands.
That's the kicker. There it is. There it is.
The other thing I want to mention, when I was growing up, we played baseball on that field. And the grandstand was still there, but it was in disrepair. It was not in the greatest shape. And we called it the Rec, playing ball at the Rec. And I thought Rec stood for W-R-E-C-K. That's in relation to the grandstand. And I've talked to two other guys that I played baseball with in those days, and I said, "How'd you spell Rec?" Same thing. But it wasn't until I was talking to somebody else researching this book, they talked about the recreation grounds. I said, "What? The Rec." Oh, it wasn't a Rec, it was the recreation grounds. The grandstand was torn down, I think, in about 1978. But it was around in the 60s when I was playing baseball.
Yes, yeah. Now, you mentioned some names that I knew very well, too. Reg Ride, you mentioned him in there. Elwood Corbett, he's related to you, actually.
Yes, yeah.
And Naughty Lee, of course.
Yeah, yes.
Of course.
Elwood Corbett was a bat boy with the team. And he, I think I mentioned in the book, I didn't know this, of course, but then when I put out a feeler in the local paper, he called me. He said, I think I mentioned in the book, he said, "Doug, they were all heroes to me." Yeah. Some other names that might be familiar to people of a certain age, or people and places. The Canadian Pacific Railway return excursion fare to Ottawa was 90 cents. So that's 35 cents for go to a ball game, 90 cents to take the train back and forth to Ottawa. So, a new Oldsmobile from Rideau Motors sales started at $1,065. A Pontiac, $925. Joseph P. Elwood was a licensed auctioneer and sold real estate. Local businesses included Aza's Fruit Store, Davidson's Bread, Purity Milk, Rogers Drug Store, Harry Scott Menswear, Muckle's Diner, Soper's Coal, and Fraser's Service Station. Dr. A.B. Murphy graduated from Queen's University. The mayor was local businessman J.J. Marsh. Smith Falls native J.A.B. Dulmage had recently been promoted from captain to major in the Canadian Army. He later became was a prominent lawyer in town, Barney Dulmage. Gordon Tom sold lumber. Percy Lockwood sold radios and refrigerators. David Ain and Ben Wiseman sold clothes. John Lees was appointed police chief in February. In March, George Bissonnette fell from the top of a railway car and broke his leg. George Otway was principal of the Collegiate. Mary McCollum taught English. Claude Young coached the basketball team. Harry Buchanan was killed in a railway accident. Gus Dobie was editor of the Record News. It was a long time ago, but not so very far away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And the lady that ran the boarding house?
Elva Lormer, she was the jewel of the people I talked to. She was 98 years old. She was living at a Hilltop Manor in Merrickville. I went out and interviewed her twice. In fact, the first person I talked to was her son, the one who remembers buying sugar for $1 a pound. And I asked him a few questions. He said, I can't remember this. Talk to my mother. And I thought he was putting me off, So he said, I don't want anything to do with this guy. But he was right. His mother had a clearer memory than he did of those days. And again, I can read an excerpt of what Elva Lormer told me. She said, "We were all such friends. The lads would tell me everything. I can almost tell you where they sat at the tables. It was such a busy life we had. My son was in high school and helped wait on the tables in the house. He was very friendly with the lads. I had to have some ladies come in and help me with the work around the house. Some of the boys had to stay at the Rideau Hotel. I could only take so many. She could take up to 9 players. Every clothes closet was taken. Even some of the boys who stayed at the hotel would come for supper. Also, sometimes the club would have visitors over, and they stayed at my place too. If there weren't 16 for supper, we'd feel as if we just weren't up to par. When we would get our work done, we would try to go to all the ball games. The railway paid me $6 a week for each player, and that was steady. The boys might go over to the States for 2 days, but the pay stayed the same. The railway would send me a check every week. There were times when a player got sick, I would call the manager, Johnny Haddock, at the Rideau Hotel and tell him to send over the doctor. He would say, Mrs. Lormer, you've got those boys spoiled. I'd insist, you send over the doctor. Frank Hogan drove the bus. I can see him so clearly behind the wheel, waiting at the front of my home for the players to get on board. When the bus drove up to take them all away at the end of the season, every one of them kissed me goodbye. We were such good friends. Even after the team left Smiths Falls, some of them drove back from New York to see us. I have a very hard time remembering all the names, but some I recall very clearly. Al Smith was so big in the club. He was very popular. My daughter Ina thought the world of Frankie Byrne. When he left the team, she was very disappointed to see him go. We all liked Johnny Orpheus. He was such a nice man. They were all such honest boys. At the end of the year, Andy Pala was called home in a hurry. He didn't have money to buy a ticket. He came to me to see if I would lend him the money to buy his ticket. I said, certainly, Andy, so I gave him the money. Andy said, now I'll send it right back to you when I get back. When payday came, Andy's letter came, and he didn't only return the money, but he sent some extra money for me to buy a present for myself. That's how honest they were. And that is Andy Palau on the front of the cover.
Oh, that's him.
That's him. That's Andy Palau. Yeah.
Now, I got my book at the Heritage House Museum.
Yes.
Where can people get this book?
Well, there's one of the things that surprised me the most. I did order some books when I first published it, first printed, and they sold for quite well. So I ordered some more, and most of them sold, but I had some left over. But they've been sitting around in my house for a while. But last summer, since I've been selling my Frost and Wood book, and my Frost and Wood books come out, there's renewed interest in the baseball book. So I usually take a few of the baseball books with me because people are interested in that too. When I tell people, to me, they're companions. My motivation was the same to do both books. The way I went about it was exactly the same. Now the books look a lot different. They're done many years apart, but I feel they're both companion books. In fact, one of the comments that I heard from a young woman several years ago was a lady. She worked at the Heritage House Museum, and she said, "I really enjoyed Baseball Summer." I said, "I wouldn't think you'd be interested in baseball." She said, "No, I don't like baseball at all." But you talked a lot about Smiths Falls in this book, and I really enjoyed that. And in a sense, this book covers 116 years, so there's not a lot about Smiths Falls as time goes on, through that period. But here, it's 1 year. 1 year. And so I do have quite a bit about Smiths Falls, what it was like to live in Smiths Falls at that time, and that is appealing to some people, I think.
It is.
So where do you get the books? Only 2 places: Heritage House Museum and at the Railway Museum. That's the last of them. I have no more.
That's the last of them. All right. Well, get out there and get yourself a book too.
That's right.
You will enjoy it. It's a good read for sure. For sure. Yeah. Lots about Smiths Falls. 1 year, yes, 1 season. So it's baseball summer. Thanks for joining us again. My history teacher, Mr. Phillips, Doug Phillips. This is baseball summer. It's the story of the 1937 Smiths Falls Beavers. Yeah. Thanks for joining us today.